Hi, this is Mike again. Today I wanted to talk to you about one of the 7 different homeschooling options out there. I am going to talk to you about one of the different methods and not any specific curriculum you might use. In order to begin your journey in homeschooling, you first need to make a decision to withdraw your kids out of the public school system. Next, you need to figure out who will serve as the teacher for your kids. Will one of the parents be the primary teacher, will one of the grandparents be the teacher, or will you hire someone to teach your kids? Or will you join with other parents and share teaching responsibility? The next decision you have is to determine what type of teaching method you want to employ. That is where this video comes into play. We have attempted to identify different teaching methods. Some are Christian-based, and some are not. We recommend using a Christian-based method in order to ground your kids in God's Word and correct some of the indoctrination that your child may have experienced in public school. You can use the Christian curriculum in any of these different methods of teaching, and we will discuss the different curriculum in upcoming videos on the homeschooling topic. One of the key advantages of homeschooling is also among its biggest challenges, which is the various options that are available. Homeschooling is roughly as old as humanity, but according to the Coalition for Responsible Home Education, the modern homeschooling movement can trace its roots to John Holt's writing on unschooling back in the 1970s. Later came the Christian homeschool movement in the 80s and 90s. By 1993, homeschooling was legalized in all 50 states. With the swelling ranks of homeschools came an influx of different options. Homeschooling effectively set off an earthquake in the educational world. It triggered flooding in the market of school choices, with a veritable tsunami of methodologies, curricula, publishers, projects, and whatnot. Today, newcomers and veterans alike may find the sea of options overwhelming. To help you narrow down the search, we offer an overview of the leading homeschool styles. As you hear about these summaries, think about what sounds most appealing to you and what would best suit your needs. For each homeschooling teaching method, we have included resource links. Hopefully, this gives you a better idea of how you want to structure your homeschool environment. Once you figure out the method or methods you wish to employ, you can better identify the curriculum that you will use. Homeschooling can be as traditional as school-at-home programs where students study the same stuff at home as do their peers at the local school. Or homeschooling can be as radical as unschooling education where the lessons are student-directed explorations devoid of homework and tests. We hope this rundown helps you weigh your options and find the homeschool method that best suits you and your kids. We will be presenting 7 main approaches to homeschooling. For each method, we will identify benefits and drawbacks. Listen closely to each method so you can decide which one or ones you wish to employ. The 7 methods we will be discussing are classical, Charlotte Mason, Montessori, unschooling, school at home, unit studies, and last, eclectic education. In the next few minutes, we will introduce first, the classical method with its considerations of the benefits and drawbacks. Following is a brief sample assessment describing the general personality best suited for the classical method. If that method really appeals to you, and it looks like it fits your personality, then you can dig deeper by using the resource lists, which link to pertinent teaching guides, curricula, and homeschooling networks that we will provide with the video. Bear in mind, there is considerable overlap between many of these educational models. This means that there is plenty of room, if needed, to share and borrow ideas between styles. Homeschool teachers typically mix methods and materials liberally. But to avoid any unsavory creations, it's probably best to get a good working knowledge of your teaching materials and methods before splicing them with others. Now let's discuss more the classical method, its considerations, benefits, and drawbacks. First, we will discuss the classical method. The classical method is one of the most popular homeschooling styles. It borrows the wisdom of time-tested educational practices dating from as far back as ancient Greece and Rome. In the case of biblical classical models, also known as the principal approach, the roots trace back even further, to Hebrew concepts in the Old Testament. Typical classical homeschools employ great books, for example, Adler, Hutchins, and Van Doren, and an applied trivium framework such as Weisbauer. That means, the canon, of great books, classics and masterpieces, get top billing, as students learn facts and data in grammar school, logic and critical thinking in middle school, and rhetoric and self-expression in high school. The classical method often incorporates Greek and Latin learning, though these are not required. Biblical classical education will also place a heavy emphasis on the Bible and biblical worldview training. The subject areas are, as much as possible, interwoven into a chronological reading plan so that students are studying the various subject areas historically. In this way, students are equipped to understand the consequence of ideas over time. This method is distinct from conventional schooling and other homeschooling methods, such as unschooling, unit studies, school at home, which tend to jump around from topic to topic, or which reserve history for a separate subject area. Another prominent feature of classical learning is the use of Socratic dialogues. Socratic dialogues foster robust discussion and debate through open-ended questions, encouraging students to go beyond mere comprehension or skill training in order to achieve enriching understandings of self and world. See also, the welltrainedmind.com and definition for classical ed. So what are the benefits of a classical education? Classical education offers many benefits, making it one of the most popular homeschooling methods today. This method also has the reputation of being the most prestigious homeschool method, noted for producing little geniuses who are better readers than most adults. While that prestige comes at a cost, listen to our discussion of drawbacks. It's generally not as expensive as school at home, unless it's a classical school at home. The major benefits of a classical education system are, it is well proven. This is a time-tested and well-proven educational style having been used in various ways over thousands of years. It uses great books. The focus on great books lends a sense of prestige as students become familiar with some of the most influential ideas and most important conversations throughout history and across the globe. And they do all of this by studying books that should be on everyone's reading list. It has an emphasis on reading. Reading is a high priority in this method. Classical students are typically well-read, and familiar with key texts across the history of Western civilization. It normally includes language learning. Depending on the brand of classical learning, space is carved out for different classical or modern languages. The principal approach, biblical classical education, may teach biblical Hebrew or Koine Greek. Traditional classical education trains students in Latin and classical Greek. And modern classical education may use any of these, as well as Spanish, French, German or another useful modern language. It also includes logic critical thinking. The trivium reinforces a special place for learning logic. Whether this is taught as classical Aristotelian logic, as critical thinking, or as lateral thinking and problem solving, the point is that classical education reinforces one of the life skills most often neglected in formal public, and even private schools, logic. It is adaptable. This method can fit most any student, even students with dyslexia. Compared to public and private schools, this method is far more adaptable. However, it isn't as flexible as some of the other homeschool methods like relaxed schooling or unschooling. It also is rigorous systematic. While some methods are free-flowing and student-directed, classical education can incorporate those liberties while retaining a backbone of academic rigor and systematic scope. Teachers are not restricted to a hands-off and indirect approach, though they can use that strategy if they like. Instead, there are lots of clear texts, schedules, and learning plan recommendations so parent-teachers can make sure all the key competencies are covered. There are a lot of choices. Because the classical method is so popular, there are lots of ready-to-use curricula and materials from which to choose. There are many networking possibilities. The classical method boasts some of the largest and most active homeschool networks, including groups, meetups and associations. So what are some of the drawbacks of classical education? While the classical method has many strengths, no method is perfect. And there are some real trade-offs one should bear in mind before committing to the classical method. Also remember that each of these drawbacks can be mitigated or resolved with a little ingenuity on the part of the parent-teacher. The amount of reading can create reading trouble. Some students, and teachers, may find the amount of reading too difficult or counterproductive. For example, students may lose a love for reading because they are required to read faster and shallower than they'd like. Or teachers may be tempted to implement books that are written at the student's reading level, but which are driven by themes and issues too sophisticated for the student to appreciate. Also, the amount of reading typical of classical schools poses a particular problem for students who struggle with reading. This problem may be overcome, but it's still a problem. There are time trade-offs. The heavy focus on books and reading takes away time from other areas of study. For some students, reading can be a time-consuming activity. And for students more gifted in other areas, their strengths might suffer and stagnate under the pressure of a heavy reading schedule. Classical education can be inflexible. Compared to conventional schooling, most any homeschool method is more adaptable, including the classical method. But compared to other homeschooling methods, the classical method is generally less flexible. The Weisbauer classical method is built on a particular understanding of student development, the applied trivium, a classical recommendation for subject areas, the trivium and quadrivium, and a chronological curriculum. It would betray the principles of that method, for example, to teach history out of chronological order, or to teach logic to second graders. It is less experiential and interactive learning, While classical homeschooling is liable to offer much more experiential and interactive learning than public or private schools, on average, this method typically employs more desk work, reading, and rote learning than some other homeschool methods like unschooling or Montessori. Some think some of the learning is impractical. It may be argued that Greek and Latin languages aren't very practical for modern students. Sure, there's a counter-argument to be made. But for classical homeschools committed to teaching Greek, Latin, or even Hebrew, they are trading in time that could have been spent learning Spanish, auto and home repair, keyboarding, computer programming, or SAT or ACT test preparation. Classical or principal approach might be for you if you love the idea of studying the most influential books ever printed in English, the great books. You are generally unimpressed with a lot of newfangled learning methods, and child psychology theories, that aren't very time-honored or well-proven. You prize logic and critical thinking to the extent that you want your student to have focused study on these subjects. You think history should be taught as a narrative and would like to see different subject areas aligned with chronological history. You want your student to learn foreign languages, even classical languages, like Greek and Latin. Instead of lots of tests and quizzes, you prefer guided intelligent dialogues and exercises in abstract thinking. You don't want to reinvent the wheel, you just want an educational model that works. I hope discussing this homeschooling method was beneficial. As I mentioned before, some of the methods are set up for the Christian curriculum, and others are less so. The curriculum available will be discussed in other upcoming videos. Be sure to watch our other videos on homeschooling methods. There are a total of 7 methods used in homeschooling. They are classical, Charlotte Mason, Montessori, unschooling, school at home, unit studies, and eclectic education. Nehemiah Reset has produced a video on each of these methods. You should be able to find them on nehemiahreset.org, our website, and on our Rumble and YouTube accounts. We look forward to seeing you again on one of these videos or on videos on other cultural issues. Thanks for watching.